Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and today's part 3 of our 4-part look at the Commander 2017 deck list. Today we're looking at Vampiric Bloodlust. Now, if you missed it a couple days ago, we looked at the cat deck. Yesterday we looked at the dragon deck. Today is the vampire deck. We're going to wrap things up tomorrow with the wizard deck. Now, if you saw the previous 2 videos, you know what to expect here. We're going to look at the complete deck list, starting off with the 17 brand new cards first. So we're going to take a deep dive, review those cards, and then I'll go a little bit quicker through the rest of the deck as we look through the reprints, and then finally at the end I'll give you my final thoughts. Now, quickly before we get started, if you check out the description below, you'll find a couple ways to support us, one of which is our Amazon affiliate links. Anything you purchase via those links, a small percentage will come back to support us. And secondly, you'll find our Patreon page linked below as well. Those are always appreciated. Having said that, let's get into the cards for today. And we're start off with those foil commanders. So each of these decks comes with 3 foil commanders. The first one is the featured commander that you'll see on the front of the box, Edgar Markov, and this is the featured commander. It has Eminence, which is the featured mechanic for this particular commander year, and you'll find that the primary commander of each of these decks has an Eminence ability. In this case, what happens is whenever you cast another vampire spell, Edgar Markov is going to give you a 1/1 black vampire creature token. It doesn't matter whether he's in the battlefield or in the command zone, this will happen, and that's actually pretty sweet. Now, the card itself beyond that, there's been a little bit of discussion back and forth on message boards and such, whether this card's good or not. I'm actually pretty high on it. Here's my thoughts on it. First off, it's not flashy. It's not a showy card. It's not doing anything complicated. But it's just a solid card. It's a good workhorse card for you for 6 mana. It's a 4/4 first strike haster. When this attacks, it gets +1/+1, as well as all your other vampires are getting +1/+1. So it's creating this anthem effect that hits itself. So it's actually attacking in as a 5/5 the first time with first strike. And hopefully you already have some vampires on the battlefield from the early turns where you're casting some small creatures and also getting those tokens. This is a lot of damage quickly on the battlefield for this particular deck with this card as its commander. I really like it. I think it can do some serious work for you. And again, it's not doing anything super complicated or crazy. It's just getting in for some damage and bolstering your team. And it's really solid for 6 mana in my opinion. All right, let's look at another option you have as a commander, Lycia Sanguine Tribune. Now, one of the things they've done really well with all of these products is they've created 3 commanders that focus on different aspects of the deck. And this particular deck, I feel like they balanced it better than maybe the previous 2 that we've even seen. Now, Lycia's whole stick really is life gain. Now, you can get this card out cheaper if you're able to gain some life the turn. Of course, it has lifelink as well. And on top of it, you can pay life to give this counter. So it all revolves around life. The card itself also is a first striker too, so it has that efficiency coming into the battlefield. It doesn't have haste though, like Edgar has, but still a very good card, I think. So if you're more into the life gain mechanics, and you can always upgrade the deck too and add more of those, then this might be your choice for the commander. Mathas Fiend Seeker. This one's interesting. One thing I do like about Mathas is he's cheaper than the others. Just 3, 1 for each of the Mardu colors. You get a 3/3 Menace. I mean, those stats aren't overwhelming, but sometimes Menace will get by for some damage. Now, what's really interesting, though, at the beginning of your end step, put a bounty counter on target creature an opponent controls, and then as long as that counter exists, if that creature dies, then each opponent draws a card and gains 2 life. So it encourages action and encourages people to take out this particular creature that you put the bounty counter on. And thematically, that's awesome. First off, I do have to say that. That is a fun mechanic, and I really like it. Secondly, it plays into another thing this deck is trying to do, and it's a baked-in kind of attrition plan that this deck has. You're going to see a lot of removal. You're going to see a lot of... You have board sweeps, of course. All the decks have those. But you're going to see some more pinpoint removal, definitely, in this deck, which makes it a pretty powerful choice in some ways. Also, you're going to have a lot of discards, stuff like that. So this deck plays into Mathas's strong point really through and through, and you're going to notice that as we go through the rest of the reprints that we see here today. All right, let's look at the new creatures. First brand new creature is Bloodline Necromancer. I'm really high on this one too. It's a 3/2 lifelinker for 5. Okay, that's not super exciting, but look at this ability now. When this enters the battlefield, you may return target vampire or wizard creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. And spoiler alert, you're going to get a copy of this in the wizard deck too. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Now, what's kind of interesting is the wizard deck is actually playing more into the Graveyard Matters theme than the vampires are. So in some ways, this might even be a better card in the wizard deck than it is here, but it's still a really good card. Like, you're going to find stuff in your graveyard to reanimate with this. It goes directly into the battlefield, and that's really key. Strong card. This is definitely going to be one of those cards that transcends just this product, and you'll see this in a lot of different commander decks. Bloodsworn Steward, another real good inclusion here. 2 red, 2 4/4 flying. If I just stopped right there, I'd say that's a really hyper-aggressive card, especially for red, getting a 4/4 flyer for 4. You don't see that every day. Now, on top of it, though, commander creatures you control get +2/+2 and have haste. So you play your commander, maybe most importantly, it can attack in right away. That haste can be huge. That can lead to big swings. +2/+2 is nice too. And I like the wording, commander creatures you control. So if somehow you're able to take control of another commander, it counts there too. But anyway, fantastic, fantastic inclusion. Crimson Honor Guard. This one's interesting, a little more high variance here because you have to notice that this affects all players. So at the end of the turn, if you don't have a commander in play, you take 4 damage from this card. That includes you too. So you have to be pretty confident that you're going to be able to keep your opponent's commanders off the board and keep yours on the board, basically, if you're playing with this. The variance here makes me feel like I don't know if it's worth the risk, but if any deck can pull it off, this deck might be the one to do it. You're going to find a lot of removal in here. Kiru Mind Eater. This one's not too exciting for me. I like the ability, but it is, again, high variance. You're not going to be able to get across with this all too often in a game of Commander. It will happen now and then, especially maybe early in the game if you're lucky enough to get it out early. But then again, the cards you hit, you may or may not be able to even use. So, I don't know, it just doesn't feel worth it to me, quite honestly. And most of the time, it's going to be happily blocked by 2 creatures. Patron of the Vein. Now, this one I really like. 6 casting cost. Comes into play originally as a 4/4 flyer, but the whole idea here is you're going to destroy target creature, and that will give this +1/+1. Now, it also exiles the creature and gives the +1/+1 to all your vampires, not just this. So again, it creates this Anthem effect, and it creates a situation now going forward, as long as this is in play anyway, it really hoses reanimation or graveyard shenanigans, because whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, it gets exiled. Not just the first time, but as long as this exists. So it hoses some of the reanimation, it gives an Anthem effect, it in itself is a pretty good card for an attacker, and it destroys something when it enters the battlefield. Yeah, sign me up. This is pretty awesome. Alright, let's look at some of the new sorceries. We'll start with Disrupt Decorum. This is actually one of my favorites. I mentioned this when it was originally previewed, but the flavor text, dinner and politics don't mix, the art, it's just an amazing package all in all. So, Goad is a cool ability. We saw this in Conspiracy 2. If you ever played some Conspiracy 2 drafts, you probably know that Goad really helps speed up the games a little bit. So I like cards like this coming out of these prepackaged decks, especially if you're playing them as is on the kitchen table. It's kind of nice to have cards to create action, and this will definitely create action. Now, remember, Goad is going to create a situation where everyone has to attack, and they technically can't attack you unless there's no other options, which might happen sometimes, and that's not necessarily a bad thing if you have the defense, especially towards the end of the game. It's like 1v1 or something. So overall, I think it's a really good card. Kindred Charge. This really wants to be played with enters the battlefield effects and tribal, so if you have some good enters the battlefield effects to exploit, this is a fine card for you. This is also good at the end of the game, or maybe you're trying to take out your last opponent or something like that. There will be times where this will be kind of a dead card, especially early on in the matchups, but it kind of is what it is. I think it might be worth it just to have something like this in your deck. New Blood. This one I do really like. It does have the additional cost of having to tap a vampire, but you steal a creature, which is always kind of nice, especially in black. You don't see that all the time. And beyond that, though, you get to change the text of at least one creature type on the card to vampire. So that gives this card some versatility. You could steal something with it, especially, again, if you're at the kitchen table playing these things out of the box. There could be some really good targets for this that are enhancing other tribes that you can change to vampire. Or you could even change a card you own that you put in and switch it to Vampire and not kind of ignore the whole game control piece of it if you already control the creature, but then just simply changing the text to Vampire, sometimes that matters. A lot of interesting combos you could do there. You can turn any sort of tribal lord into a Vampire lord. You can turn any sort of tribal creature that's going to create a token or something into Vampire tokens. So there's a lot of different ways you could go with this card, and I do like it. And at the end of the day, if you're just stealing something, that could be a big enough swing. It's good enough sometimes. Let's move on to a new instant. Teferi's Protection. Teferi, one of my favorite characters in Magic lore. This card is amazing, and I'll tell you right now, price-wise, when you look at secondary market pre-release prices, a lot of people are interested in this card. It's about $12, $15 right now, and with good reason. This is a cool card. First off, I want to say it's amazing to me we're talking about phasing in 2017. Phasing itself was not a popular mechanic or one that I really liked when Mirage was out. It was hard to understand for new players. It was kind of slow and hokey. But this is a good use of phasing. So congrats for finding a way to really make that particular mechanic work. But beyond that, I mean, until your next turn, your life total can change. And you have protection from everything. All permanents you control phase out. And of course, you exile this. But this is at instant speed. So if someone's going to go off with some crazy combo, try to take out the table, you can kind of be like, no, you missed, right? And that's actually really sweet to surprise somebody with. Or on the flip side, if you have the crazy combo, you can use this to try to protect yourself as you go off. So yeah, the card is amazing. This is another card that will definitely transcend just this product into a lot of different decks, I think. All right, let's look at two new enchantments. And we've actually talked about these in previous videos, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. But Curse of Disturbance, and you get Curse of Vitality. I will say about these two cards, the first one, of course, making a 2/2 black zombie, this one gaining 2 life. The 2 life might be in some ways more relevant even in this particular deck, considering the life gain sub-theme that's going on here. But just generally, I'm really happy that they created this particular cycle. Really nice interactive curse cycle for multiplayer games. And they're very skill intensive. There's a lot you can do with this. You have to decide which opponent you're going to play this on, or maybe even play it on yourself. The timing of playing these cards are actually pretty important. So I really like what they did with the cycle just generally. Kindred Boon. This is a way to protect some of your stuff. Considering this deck has a lot of sweepers, it feels like it really fits in well here. All right, let's look at one new artifact, and it's Heirloom Blade. We actually talked about this one again in a previous video, but it costs 3, 1 to equip. You get a +3/+1. That's okay. I mean, it's nothing special. The ability's interesting. I mean, it gives you some sort of card equilibrium when the creature dies, and yeah, that's okay. Again, maybe there's better things out there that you could upgrade into, but it's fine out of the box. All right, let's look at the one new land that is included, and this is actually included in all 4 decks, so we have talked about it before, but basically it's a command tower that comes into play tapped, Path of Ancestry. But on top of that, if you play with Tribal, you'll have some opportunities to scry 1. But even if you don't play with Tribal, just playing your commander, as long as it's not one of the 2014 Planeswalker commanders, you'll get to scry when you play your commander. So that alone might be worth it. And it's actually pretty sweet. I think this is going to become one of those staples for mana bases now in Commander. All right, let's move on to reprints. And we're going to start off by looking at the creatures that have been reprinted for this particular product. And we have Anawan the Rune Sage. Here's the first card that you're going to really see the attrition game start to take shape. Now, this is a 4/3 for 5. Okay, it's a little squishy. Sure, it dies to Lightning Bolt and that type of thing. But at the beginning of your upkeep, each player sacks a non-vampire creature. If your opponents can't deal with this, now they're going to try to deal with it, but if they can't for some reason, this thing is going to really start to hurt the board states for your opponents. Really not so much your board state in most cases, at least out of the box. So yeah, really sweet inclusion here. Blood Artist. This card does a couple of things. It plays into this whole attrition aspect of you destroying your opponent's creatures, and it also helps you gain life to play into that piece of this deck. Blood Baron of Viskova. Another really sweet vampire with lifelink. This one also has pro white and pro black, which makes it difficult to deal with at times. And in a game of Commander, it's probably not going to be impossible to turn on that ability, right? I mean, as long as you have more than 30 life, which you do start off with more than 30 life. But if an opponent can get down to 10 or less, this thing becomes a 10/10 flyer with lifelink, pro white, pro black. This is definitely a force that has to be dealt with. Bloodhusk Ritualist. Now, discard isn't a huge theme here. It's a very small sub-theme, but it does play into the attrition nature of the deck. Next we have Bloodlord of Vaskoth, and this is one of my favorite cards actually included here. And you might wonder why. It costs 5, it's a 3/3, but it has Bloodthirst 3, one of my favorite mechanics. This is a mechanic that encourages aggressive play and rewards you for being able to damage your opponents. And it's a Vampire Lord, so whenever you cast a vampire creature, it gains Bloodlust 3. So if you can consistently do even a little bit of damage every turn, then your vampires are coming in with 3+1/+1 counters on it. This is actually coming in as a 6/6 flyer with the other ability. So that's actually pretty sweet. So if you were inclined to, you could probably add a little more Bloodthirst into this deck if you wanted to upgrade. I think it could be pretty sweet. Butcher of Malachur. Another card that is really going to play into the whole attrition game. This time around, you get yourself a 5/4 flyer that has Grave Pact built in, so whenever you lose a creature, basically, your opponents each have to sacrifice a creature. You're going to see a lot of these sacrifice effects show up, which, yes, sometimes can be a little high variance, especially later in the game if your opponent's playing with tokens and stuff like that. But they do help to keep the board a little bit clean and just keep that attrition game going. Next we have another Vampire Lord with Captivating Vampire. Another good one. Other vampires get +1/+1, and on top of it, if you tap 5 untapped vampires you control, you get to steal a target creature and also becomes a vampire. Dark Imposture. Another card that is good for this attrition game. It starts off a little squishy as a 2/2, but if you have the mana, and this is a nice little mana sink, you can exile target creature and put a +1/+1 counter on this. So over time, this will grow, it plays into the attrition. Exile is a nice effect to have to deal with certain threats that could come back from the graveyard. And also on top of all that, it steals the abilities, the activated abilities, I should say, of all creature cards exiled with it. So yeah, it gets more and more powerful, not only power toughness-wise as you keep it around, but also in its abilities, and that could be pretty sweet, especially if you can pick up an ability that defends it. Drana Calastria Bloodchief, the original Drana, and again, another really good attrition card. You're able to pour some mana into it, another good mana sink, and if you do, it can take out some creatures on your opponent's side with that -0/-X ability, and it can buffer its power to get in there for some damage. Falkenrath Noble, here's another one of those cards that's going to cause a target opponent to lose 1 life and for you to gain 1 life. And this is whenever this or another creature dies. So it doesn't even have to be a creature you control. It plays really well into the whole attrition aspect and also plays well into the life gain aspect. Malachur Blood Witch. Now here's another card that's kind of along the same lines here. When this enters the battlefield, each opponent loses life equal to the number of vampires you control, but maybe more importantly, you gain life equal to the life lost this way. In a game of Commander, that could be huge. I mean, this could be a gigantic life swing. Could play really well with that second Commander we saw. So yeah, definitely a card that makes sense in this deck, and it also has protection from white and flying on top of it. Pawn of Ulamog. This is interesting. We saw a couple of good mana sinks, and this card will support that a little bit, because whenever this or another non-token creature you control dies, you get one of these 0/1 Eldrazi tokens that can be sacrificed for colorless mana. So it feels a little out of place in some ways in this deck, because you don't really see something like this in any of the other cards, but it is kind of nice to have if you want a situation maybe later in the game where you have some expendable mana to pour into something like we've already seen. Well, yeah, this will be just fine. Rakish Air. This is okay. It's a little squishy, again, being a 2/2 when it comes into play for 3. But then whenever a vampire you control deals combat damage to a player, it gets a +1/+1 counter, which hopefully will be something you'll be able to do quickly, and maybe as soon as you put the card out. Now, it doesn't have evasion or anything, but it's a vampire. It's serviceable. Sagromancer. Here's a card that's going to reward you for the attrition. Whenever an opponent's creature dies, you gain some life. Whenever an opponent has to discard, you gain some life. Skeletal Vampire. If you played with this before, you know this is an annoying card at times. Sacrificing a bat to regenerate it, and the mana sink of 5, which basically lets you sack a bat to get 2, so they kind of keep doubling, at least 1 at a time anyway. And it can be really hard to get rid of at times if you don't have like an exile ability or something like that. It's not huge as a 3/3 flyer, but it's just super annoying. Stromkirk Captain, another Vampire Lord here with First Strike, giving other vampires +1/+1 in First Strike. Tithe Drinker. Here's a life linker that also has an extort ability built in, which works really well in this particular build. Vampire Nighthawk, maybe one of the best known vampires. Great inclusion here. Fane Drinker. This has fight built in for 1 red when you tap it, and as time goes on, especially with some other effects to bolster it, This card can get pretty overwhelming. It also has flying on top of it, and keep in mind when a creature dies that it has damaged, whether it's through fight or combat, it gets a +1/+1 counter. So there's a lot of ways to grow this card in the deck. Alright, let's look at sorceries. We'll begin with Ambition's Cost. Fantastic draw spell. Blood Tribute, another card that could lead to a big life gain, a big swing of life between you and one of your opponents. Consuming Vapors, an attrition card that also lets you gain life, and it has Rebound. Damnable Pact. I always like this card. It's a lot better, I think, in Commander than it worked out in, say, Constructed. The big thing holding it back in Constructed was the fact that it was a sorcery and not an instant. If this thing was an instant, I think it would be super pushed. But in a game of Commander, it does a couple things for you. It's a nice mana sink. Yes, you're trading life, but again, you have hopefully some expendable life in this deck. You're trading life for cards, which is cool. Also, too, in a pinch, you can use this to finish off an opponent if you needed to. Fell the Mighty. This is one of the board sweeps you get for this deck. It's a little conditional, but most of the time I think it'll be okay. Merciless Eviction. This one's a little more reliable, and it exiles. That's actually very important at times. And this is super versatile too. You get to choose one, exile all artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or planeswalkers, so it deals with the problem that you have at hand. Read the Bones. Nice extra draw spell card that allows you to dig a little bit. Siphon Mine. Here's another one of these discard effects, but maybe more importantly is the card draw you're getting off of this in a multiplayer game. Alright, let's look at instants. Crackling Doom, another attrition card, this time forcing each opponent to sacrifice the creature with greatest power among creatures that they control. Go for the Throat. This is actually not a cheap card, and it's been reprinted a number of times, but it's very good. It'll run you about $4 or $5 right now, so it's good to see a reprint here. Mortify, more pinpoint removal, this time for creature or enchantment. Return to Dust, a card to deal with artifacts or enchantments. Skeletal Scrying, another way to look for cards at instant speed at the expense of your resources. Swords to Plowshares. Maybe one of the best removal spells ever printed. This is actually a really nice inclusion here. It's been reprinted a number of times now, but still a great card. And also, too, its controller gains life equal to its power in a pinch. If you really needed to gain life in this deck, you could use it on one of your own things. Alright, let's look at enchantments. You get a Black Market. I always like this card too. Basically, when creatures die, it gets counters, and those counters in turn lead to extra mana each pre-combat main phase. Can be really good for some of those mana sinks. Blind Obedience, another Extort card. The ability's fine, but I think I'm more excited about this because of the Extort in this deck. Outpost Siege. We saw some sieges in the Dragon deck, and this time around we get the red one, and the Khan's ability is okay. I mean, it's really more for a 1v1 aggro deck, I feel like, but sometimes it'll be relevant. The Dragon side is maybe more what you want to do with this particular deck whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield. Outpost Siege deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Kind of plays into the attrition a little bit. Sanguine Blood, another card that's not cheap, another like $4 or $5 card, which is pretty nice to get here. But whenever you gain life, this time target opponent loses that much life, so it turns that life gain into a weapon. Underworld Connections, nice way to draw some cards at the expense of life again. I always really like this card. It actually played a little into Standard during its time. Alright, let's move on to some artifacts. Now, you're going to see mostly color fixing here, but a few exceptions, starting with Blade of the Blood Chief. And this is a cool card. It hasn't been printed in a really long time, actually. Great with vampires. Doesn't do anything on its own, which is a little awkward, but only costs 1 to cast and 1 to equip. So, in this deck, this could do a little work for you. Boros Signet for color fixing. You get a Door of Destinies. I've always kind of thought Door of Destinies or Coat of Arms, or maybe both, depending on your deck if you're all into tribal. What's nice about Door of Destinies is if you play it and then say there's a board sweep and it sticks around, then the creatures you play after that still get the benefit, where Coat of Arms is sort of decimated by the board sweep and you have to start rebuilding. But on the opposite side of the coin, Coat of Arms, you can just throw it into play when you already have creatures in play and just attack right away and get the bonus, where this needs time to build up. So, I don't know, there's a little give or take here. Ultimately, it's a cool inclusion, and if you wanted to run some other things like it, you could. Orzhov Signet, again for color fixing. Rakdos Signet for color fixing. Skull Clamp makes more sense in this deck than when we saw it in the cat deck, I think, where the cat deck was doing 2/2 tokens, and this does have some opportunities for some 1/1 tokens. You could get a little more utility out of this card than in the previous deck we saw it in. Soul Ring. There's one of these in each deck. I'm glad they keep printing these things. Still a $3-4 card, even though it gets printed every year in these products into oblivion. But at the same time, could you imagine if they didn't do this, what the card would cost? One of the best mana rocks, actually the best mana rock ever printed. Well of Lost Dreams, a way to take that life gain and turn it into some card draw. Worn Power Stone, another fantastic mana rock. And let's look at the lands. Again, mostly color fixing here, although it's intriguing. Some of those come into play tap lands that give you 1 life can certainly have some more utility here. A Calm Refuge, this is one of those. Comes into play tap, but you gain a life. Bloodfell Caves, another gain life land. Bojuka Bog. I like having a Bojuka Bog just generally in Commander when I play, because if I'm in black anyway, it taps for black mana. Sure, it does come into play tapped. It slows you down a little bit. But if you ever have to deal with some graveyard shenanigans, in this case, maybe you're against that wizard deck we're going to look at tomorrow, it's just kind of nice to have. Boros Garrison, one of the bounce lands. Boros Guildgate. Cinder Barons. Command Tower, another classic staple now of these products. Evolving Wilds. Forsaken Sanctuary. Kabira Crossroads. This one actually gives you 2 life when it enters the battlefield. Nomad Outpost, one of the Tri-lands. Opal Palace, another one of the staples that have come from these products. Orzhov Basilica. Orzhov Guildgate. Rakdos Carnarium. Rakdos Guildgate. Scoured Barrens, another gain life card. Stone Quarry. Terramorphic Expanse. Urborg Volcano. Windscarred Crag, another life gain land. And then we're up to our basics. Mentioned this in the other videos, but they kept the art from last year's Commander, which is the Rebecca Guay, Kev Walker, and Mark Poole series. And they look amazing. You're going to get 4 mountains. You're going to get 3 plains. And you're going to get 8 swamps. So real quick, my final thoughts on this particular deck. I actually like this one a lot. And even though tribal-wise my heart still probably belongs to cats, I will say this. The vampire deck feels super solid. The amount of removal that's included here is going to push this deck's power level, I think, a little bit. Now, I can't sit down and play with them yet, obviously, so I can't really speak to say that this deck is more powerful than the other 3. But at least right now, it feels like it's got a little bit of an edge with the massive removal, as well as some of the fast gameplay that could come out of using, say, a card like Markov as your commander. So ultimately, the deck feels like it could have a decent level of power behind it. Other than that, I also love the fact that they were able to incorporate the 3 different styles of gameplay. Both your primary gameplay that kind of comes under Markov, as well as your secondary and tertiary options that you have with the other 2 commanders. The life gain and the attrition feel a little bit better baked in than some of the abilities we saw from the previous 2 decks we reviewed from the secondary or tertiary commanders. In other words, Miri in the Cat deck, for example, I feel like she isn't great in that particular build unless you upgrade your deck, where I feel like you don't need to do that many upgrades to feel like any of these 3 commanders are very viable. So I do think they were able to balance this deck a little more in that capacity. I mean, you can still upgrade and still make each of those lines of play a little stronger if you wanted to, for sure. But at the same time, I don't feel like you necessarily have to out of the box to really make one of the commanders work well. So I do like that. I feel like it's good balance, good power. This one is a definitely strong pickup, I think. If you're only picking up one of the 4, vampires could definitely be a good choice. But again, at the end of the day, I think you have to ask yourself, what tribe do you love to play? Because that's the ultimate question here. If you love cats, play cats. If you love wizards, which we'll look at tomorrow, play wizards. If you love the dragons, play dragons. But vampires is a good deck. They definitely put something really interesting together here. I'm looking forward to playing this and see how it is out of the box, for sure. With that being said, that's the information for today. We're going to be back tomorrow with one last video. We're going to look at all the wizards. So until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.